I never imagined that painting my front door navy blue would destroy my life, but Richard Caldwell made sure it almost did. The whole nightmare started on a Tuesday morning in late March when I was sipping coffee on my porch in my quiet suburban neighborhood of Mapleton Heights, just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. I had moved into this cookie-cutter development 2 years prior, drawn by the reasonable prices and the promise of a quiet life after my divorce. The house was a modest 3-bedroom colonial with white siding and black shutters, and I had spent the better part of the previous weekend repainting the front door a rich navy blue. It looked sharp against the cream-colored trim, and I was proud of the work. Richard Caldwell, the HOA president, pulled up in his pristine silver Lexus at exactly 8 in the morning. I watched him step out, his polo shirt tucked into khakis with a crease so sharp it could cut paper. He was in his late 50s with silver hair combed back and an expression that suggested he smelled something unpleasant wherever he went. "Mr. Bennett," he called out as he marched up my walkway, "we need to discuss your recent modification." I set down my coffee mug. "Morning, Richard." "What modification?" He gestured dramatically at my front door. "That, the color is not within the approved palette outlined in the HOA covenant." I leaned back in my chair. "I checked the guidelines online. Navy blue is listed as an acceptable trim color. For shutters, perhaps, not for doors." He pulled out a tablet and started tapping away. "The approved door colors are white, black, colonial red, and forest green. What you have done is a violation. Richard, it's navy blue. It's practically black." His jaw tightened. "The rules exist for a reason, Mr. Bennett. They maintain property values and neighborhood aesthetics. I am going to have to issue you a citation. You have 14 days to repaint the door in an approved color or you will face a fine of $100 per day." I stood up, feeling my blood pressure rise. "Are you serious?" "Over a door color that is 2 shades different from black, rules are rules." He tapped something on his tablet. "Consider this your official notice. Have a good day." He walked back to his car and I stood there fuming. This was not my first run-in with Richard Caldwell. He had cited me 6 months earlier for leaving my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though I had been in the middle of cleaning my garage and had only left them out for 20 minutes. He had also sent a violation notice to my neighbor, Tom, for parking his work truck in his driveway overnight, despite Tom being a general contractor who needed the vehicle for his livelihood. I went inside and pulled up the HOA covenant documents. After an hour of reading through the dense legalese, I found the section on exterior colors. The language was ambiguous at best. Trim colors included various shades of blue, but door colors were listed separately with only the 4 options Richard had mentioned. It seemed like a stupid distinction, but technically, he might have been right. Still, the whole thing felt petty and vindictive. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to voice my concerns and maybe push for an amendment to the color policy. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community center. That week dragged by. I kept glancing at my navy blue door, half tempted to repaint it just to avoid the hassle, but something stubborn in me refused. If I gave in now, what would stop Richard from finding a dozen other minor violations to lord over me? Thursday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center at 7. About 30 residents were scattered across the rows of folding chairs. Richard stood at the front with his laptop connected to a projector, displaying the meeting agenda. Next to him sat Susan Creamer, the HOA vice president and Richard's most loyal supporter. Susan was in her early 50s with short blonde hair and a perpetual look of disapproval. She clutched a 3-ring binder like it contained state secrets. Richard called the meeting to order with a rap of his gavel. "Good evening, everyone. We have several items on tonight's agenda, including landscaping proposals, upcoming neighborhood events, and covenant violations." The meeting dragged through budget reports and discussion about whether to hire a new landscaping company. Finally, Richard reached the violations section. "We have had several violations this month," he announced, pulling up a slide with photos. "My navy blue door was front and center. Mr. Bennett at 247 Oakwood Drive has painted his front door in a non-approved color. He has been given 14 days to correct the issue." I raised my hand. "I would like to address that." Richard's expression soured. "The floor recognizes Mr. Bennett." I stood up. I reviewed the covenant documents, and while I understand the door color list is specific, I think the rule is unnecessarily restrictive. Navy blue is a conservative, classic color that does not detract from neighborhood aesthetics. I would like to propose an amendment to expand the approved door colors to include other neutral shades. Susan Creamer jumped in before Richard could respond. "The rules are in place to prevent chaos. If we allow everyone to paint their doors whatever color they want, we will end up with neon pink and lime green doors all over the neighborhood." "I am not suggesting we allow neon colors," I said. "I am suggesting we allow a broader range of traditional neutral colors. Navy blue, charcoal gray, maybe even a burgundy." A few residents murmured in agreement. Tom, my neighbor, spoke up. "I think that is reasonable. The current list feels pretty limited." Richard banged his gavel. "We can table the discussion for the next meeting and form a committee to review the covenant language. In the meantime, Mr. Bennett, the current rule stands. You are required to repaint your door, or what?" I asked. "You will fine me $100 a day." "That seems excessive for something so minor." "It is what the covenant stipulates," Richard said coldly. "If you do not like the rules, perhaps you should have considered that before purchasing a home in this community." The condescension in his tone grated on me. I did consider it. I also considered that the HOA leadership would be reasonable people who care about the community, not petty tyrants looking for ways to flex their authority. The room went silent. Richard's face turned red. "Mr. Bennett, I will not tolerate disrespect. You are out of order." "I am out of order." "You are threatening to fine me thousands of dollars over a door color." Richard stood up, pointing at me. "You will comply with the covenant or you will face the consequences. Meeting adjourned." He slammed his gavel down and started packing up his laptop. I stood there, fuming, as other residents filed out. A few people came up to me and quietly expressed their support, but no one wanted to openly challenge Richard. It was clear he ruled the HOA with an iron fist, and most people found it easier to comply than fight back. I walked home that night more determined than ever not to repaint my door. This was no longer about the color. It was about standing up to a bully. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Richard. The subject line read, "Final warning." I opened it to find a formal letter stating that my 14-day grace period would end on April 10th, and if the door was not repainted by then, fines would begin accruing immediately. The email was CC'd to Susan Creamer and the HOA's attorney. I forwarded the email to a lawyer friend of mine, Greg Patterson, who practiced real estate law in Charlotte. I asked him if he could review the HOA covenant and advise me on my options. Greg called me back that afternoon. "I read through the documents you sent," Greg said. "The language on door colors is pretty clear. They do have the right to enforce it. So I am stuck." "Not necessarily. HOA rules can be challenged if they are applied inconsistently or if the board is acting in bad faith." "Have they cited other people for similar violations?" I thought about it. "Not that I know of, but there are not a lot of non-standard door colors in the neighborhood." "Here is my advice," Greg said. "Document everything. If Richard continues to escalate this, and especially if he starts treating you differently than other residents, you might have grounds to argue selective enforcement. Also, consider filing a formal complaint with the HOA board if you believe he is abusing his authority." "Thanks, Greg." "I appreciate it." I spent that weekend taking photos of every house in the neighborhood, cataloging the door colors and any other potential violations. I found 3 houses with doors that could arguably be considered non-compliant. One had a teal door that looked more blue-green than the approved forest green. Another had a burgundy door that was not on the approved list. A third had a door that was weathered and peeling, which violated the covenant's requirement that homes be well maintained. I compiled the photos into a document and sent it to Richard and Susan, pointing out the inconsistencies. I received no response. April 10th arrived. I did not repaint my door. The next day, I received a certified letter from the HOA informing me that I was now being fined $100 per day. The letter included an invoice for the first 7 days, totaling $700. I called Greg again. They are actually doing it. They are fining me. Do not pay it yet, Greg said. Let me draft a response. We are going to argue selective enforcement and request a hearing before the board. Greg sent a formal letter to the HOA on my behalf, outlining our position and requesting that the fines be rescinded. He also demanded a hearing to contest the violation. The HOA had 30 days to respond. 2 weeks passed with no word from Richard or the HOA. Then, on a Wednesday evening, I came home from work to find a group of people standing in my front yard. Richard was there along with Susan and 2 other board members. They were taking photos of my house. "What are you doing?" I asked, walking up to them. Richard turned to me with a smug expression. "Conducting an inspection. We have received complaints about your property." "Complaints? What complaints?" Susan held up a clipboard. "Your lawn has several bare patches, your mailbox post is leaning, and there is a crack in your driveway that needs to be repaired." I looked at my lawn. It was early April and the grass was just starting to green up after winter. Sure, there were a few bare spots, but nothing unusual for this time of year. The mailbox post had a slight tilt, but it had been like that since I moved in. The driveway crack was hairline thin. "You are making things up," I said. "This is retaliation because I am challenging the door color violation." "We are simply enforcing the covenants," Richard said. "You have 30 days to address these issues or you will face additional fines." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Let the record show that the HOA president is conducting a targeted harassment campaign against me." Richard's expression darkened. "Put that away." "No, this is my property and I have every right to document this." Susan stepped forward. "Mr. Bennett, you are making this very difficult. If you would just comply with the rules, none of this would be necessary." "I am happy to comply with reasonable rules," I said, "but this is not about rules. This is about Richard abusing his power." Richard pointed at me. "You need to be very careful, Mr. Bennett. I have a lot of influence in this community. If you continue down this path, I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are." "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means that I have connections. People listen to me. If I say you are a troublemaker, they will believe me. Your reputation in this neighborhood will be destroyed." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you threatening me?" "I am advising you," Richard said. "Think about what is best for you and your standing in this community." He turned and walked away, the rest of the board members following him. I stood there, my heart pounding, the phone still recording. That night I sent the video to Greg. "He just threatened me," I wrote. "This is getting out of hand." Greg called me within an hour. "This is good. Well, not good, but useful. He is clearly retaliating against you. Keep documenting everything. We might have a case for harassment and defamation if he actually follows through on his threats." "What should I do?" "Sit tight. Do not engage with him. Let me handle the legal side." I tried to follow Greg's advice, but Richard was not done with me. Over the next 2 weeks, I started noticing strange things. Neighbors who used to wave at me now avoided eye contact. Tom, who had been friendly and supportive, suddenly stopped returning my calls. When I ran into him at the grocery store, he made an excuse and hurried away. I finally cornered Tom one evening as he was getting his mail. "What is going on? Why are you avoiding me?" Tom looked uncomfortable. "Look, man, I do not want to get involved." "Involved in what?" "Richard has been talking. He is telling people things about you." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" Tom hesitated. "He is saying you are unstable, that you have been causing problems in the neighborhood. He told a few people that you threatened him." "That is a lie. He is the one who threatened me." "I believe you," Tom said quickly, "but Richard is convincing. And people do not want to cross him, so everyone is just going to believe his lies." Tom looked at me with pity. "I am sorry, man, I really am, but I have got to think about my own situation. Richard already has it out for me because of my work truck. I cannot afford to make things worse." He walked back to his house, leaving me standing there in disbelief. Richard was actually doing it. He was spreading lies about me to ruin my reputation. I called Greg immediately and told him what was happening. "He is slandering me. He is telling people I threatened him when he is the one who threatened me on camera." "This is serious," Greg said. "Defamation is a civil matter. If we can prove that Richard knowingly made false statements that damaged your reputation, you could sue him for slander." "What do I need to do?" "Document every instance. If anyone tells you what Richard said, get it in writing. Emails, text messages, anything that shows what he is claiming and to whom." I spent the next week reaching out to neighbors, trying to get someone to put in writing what Richard had been saying. Most people refused to get involved. But one neighbor, an older woman named Margaret who lived 2 streets over, was sympathetic. She sent me an email detailing a conversation she had overheard at a neighborhood potluck, where Richard claimed I had verbally abused him during an HOA meeting and made veiled threats against his safety. "He said you were dangerous," Margaret wrote. "He told everyone to be careful around you and to report any suspicious behavior. It was very unsettling." I forwarded the email to Greg. "Is this enough?" "It is a start. We need more, though. The more evidence we have, the stronger the case." Days turned into weeks. The fines for my door color continued to accumulate, now totaling over $3,000. The HOA sent another letter adding fines for the lawn, mailbox, and driveway issues Richard had invented. I was now facing nearly $5,000 in penalties. My stress levels were through the roof. I was not sleeping well, and my performance at work was suffering. I worked as a project manager for a construction firm, and my boss had noticed my distraction. I explained the situation to him, and while he was sympathetic, he made it clear that I needed to get my personal life under control. In mid-May, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney stating that if I did not pay the outstanding fines within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property. A lien would make it nearly impossible to sell or refinance my home. I was being backed into a corner. Greg filed a motion to halt the fines pending a hearing, arguing that the HOA was acting in bad faith and retaliating against me for challenging their authority. The hearing was scheduled for early June. Meanwhile, Richard's slander campaign continued. I found out from another neighbor that Richard had posted on the neighborhood's private Facebook group, warning residents about me. I was not part of the group because I barely used social media, but the neighbor sent me screenshots. Richard's post read, "I want to alert everyone to concerning behavior from a resident on Oakwood Drive. This individual has been hostile and aggressive toward HOA board members and has refused to comply with basic community standards. Please be cautious and report any threatening behavior to the authorities." He did not name me specifically, but it was obvious who he was talking about. Several residents had commented, expressing concern and thanking Richard for keeping them safe. A few people defended me, pointing out that I had always been a quiet, respectful neighbor, but their comments were drowned out by the pylon. I was livid. This was not just a private conversation anymore. Richard had put this in writing in a semi-public forum for dozens of people to see. I sent the screenshots to Greg. "This is exactly what we need," Greg said. "This is clear defamation. He is making false statements that are damaging your reputation. We can use this." The hearing date arrived on June 7th. It was held at the community center, and the room was packed with residents curious to see the showdown. Richard sat at the front table with Susan and the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man in his 40s named David Chen. I sat with Greg at a separate table. The hearing was presided over by an independent arbitrator, a retired judge named Helen Vargas. She reviewed the documents both sides had submitted and then invited Richard to present his case. "Your Honor," Richard began, "Mr. Bennett has willfully violated the HOA covenants by painting his door an unapproved color. Despite repeated warnings and opportunities to correct the issue, he has refused. The fines imposed are consistent with the covenant's enforcement provisions." Judge Vargas turned to me. "Mr. Bennett, why have you not repainted the door?" Greg stood up. "Your Honor, we are not disputing that the door color is technically outside the approved list. However, we are arguing that the HOA's enforcement has been selective and retaliatory. Mr. Bennett has documented multiple instances of similar or worse violations that have not been cited. Furthermore, the HOA President, Mr. Caldwell, has engaged in a campaign of harassment and defamation against Mr. Bennett in retaliation for challenging this violation." David Chen, the HOA's attorney, interjected. "Your Honor, these are baseless accusations. Mr. Caldwell has acted entirely within his authority as HOA President." "Let us see the evidence," Judge Vargas said. Greg presented the photos I had taken of other homes with non-compliant door colors and maintenance issues. He also played the video of Richard threatening to ruin my reputation. The room was silent as Richard's voice echoed through the speakers. "I have a lot of influence in this community. If I say you are a troublemaker, they will believe me. Your reputation in this neighborhood will be destroyed." Judge Vargas's expression hardened. "Mr. Caldwell, can you explain this statement?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "I was simply trying to advise Mr. Bennett that his behavior was making him unpopular in the neighborhood." "It sounds like a threat to me," Judge Vargas said. Greg continued, presenting Margaret's email and the screenshots from the Facebook group. "Mr. Caldwell has made demonstrably false statements about my client, claiming he is dangerous and has threatened him, when in fact the opposite is true. This has caused significant damage to Mr. Bennett's reputation and standing in the community." David Chen tried to argue that Richard's statements were protected opinions, but Judge Vargas was not having it. Calling someone dangerous and urging others to report them to authorities is not an opinion. It is a factual claim, and if it is false, it is defamatory. After 2 hours of testimony and argument, Judge Vargas called a recess to review the evidence. When she returned, her decision was swift. "I find that the HOA has engaged in selective enforcement of its covenants, and that Mr. Caldwell's actions constitute retaliation and harassment. The fines imposed on Mr. Bennett are hereby rescinded. Furthermore, I am recommending that the HOA board conduct an internal review of Mr. Caldwell's conduct as president." The room erupted in murmurs. Richard looked like he had been slapped. Susan tried to say something, but Judge Vargas held up her hand. "This hearing is concluded." I walked out of the community center feeling vindicated but exhausted. Greg clapped me on the back. "That went well. Now we need to talk about the defamation suit. You think we have a case?" "Absolutely. Richard's statements were false. They damaged your reputation, and we can prove it. I will draft a complaint and file it within the week." True to his word, Greg filed a civil lawsuit against Richard Caldwell for defamation, slander, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were seeking damages for the harm to my reputation, emotional distress, and punitive damages to deter future misconduct. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Richard tried to rally support, claiming he was being unfairly targeted, but the tide had turned. Many residents who had been silent during his reign of petty tyranny now felt emboldened to speak out. Stories emerged of other homeowners who had been harassed, fined for trivial violations, or bullied into compliance. Susan Creamer tried to defend Richard, but even she seemed to realize that his behavior had crossed a line. At the next HOA meeting, a motion was introduced to remove Richard as president. The vote was not even close. He was ousted, and a new president, A reasonable accountant named Brian Foster was elected in his place. Richard did not go quietly. He hired his own attorney and fought the defamation suit, claiming that his statements were opinions and that I was overly sensitive. But the evidence was overwhelming. We had the video, the emails, the Facebook posts, and testimony from multiple neighbors about what Richard had said. The case went to trial in October. The courtroom was smaller than the ones you see on TV, but the tension was just as real. Richard sat at the defense table, his attorney beside him, looking defiant. I sat with Greg, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. The trial lasted 3 days. Greg presented our evidence methodically, building a clear narrative of how Richard had abused his power and deliberately spread false information to damage my reputation. He called Margaret to the stand, who testified about the potluck conversation. He called Tom, who reluctantly admitted that Richard had told him I was unstable and potentially dangerous. The most damaging testimony came from another board member, a woman named Lisa Reynolds, who had resigned shortly after the arbitration hearing. She testified that Richard had openly bragged about making my life miserable and had said he would do whatever it took to force me out of the neighborhood. He said, "I will ruin him if I have to," Lisa testified. He was obsessed with making an example out of Mr. Bennett. Richard's attorney tried to paint me as a troublemaker who had brought this on myself by refusing to follow simple rules, but the jury was not buying it. The video of Richard's threat was played multiple times, and each time, the jurors' expressions grew more disapproving. Richard took the stand in his own defense, which was a mistake. Under cross-examination, he became defensive and evasive. When Greg asked him directly if he had told people I was dangerous, Richard tried to dodge the question. "I may have expressed concerns about Mr. Bennett's behavior," he said. "Did you or did you not tell residents that Mr. Bennett had threatened you and was potentially dangerous?" Greg pressed. "I may have said something to that effect." "Was it true?" Richard hesitated. "I felt threatened by his attitude, but did he actually threaten you? Not in so many words." "So you made it up?" "I interpreted his behavior as threatening." Greg turned to the jury. "So to be clear, Mr. Caldwell told multiple residents that Mr. Bennett was dangerous and had threatened him, when in fact Mr. Bennett had done no such thing. And he did this after threatening Mr. Bennett on camera." Richard had no good answer. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict in my favor. They awarded me $85,000 in compensatory damages for harm to my reputation and emotional distress, and an additional $100,000 in punitive damages. Richard looked like he had been punched in the gut. His attorney immediately filed a notice of appeal, but it was a hollow gesture. The verdict was solid. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It had been 7 months since Richard first confronted me about my navy blue door, 7 months of stress, sleepless nights, and fighting to clear my name. But I had won. The money was secondary. What mattered was that Richard had been held accountable for his actions. He could no longer hide behind his position of authority and bully people without consequences. In the weeks following the verdict, I learned that Richard was scrambling to pay the judgment. He tried to negotiate a settlement, offering to pay half the amount, but Greg advised me to reject it. "He needs to pay the full amount," Greg said. "Otherwise, he will not learn his lesson." Richard eventually paid, though I heard through the grapevine that he had to take out a second mortgage on his house to cover it. Susan Creamer quietly resigned from the HOA board, and several other residents who had enabled Richard's behavior also stepped down. Brian Foster, the new HOA president, reached out to me personally to apologize on behalf of the board. "What happened to you was unacceptable," he said. "We are implementing new policies to ensure this kind of abuse never happens again." One of the first things Brian did was propose an amendment to the covenant expanding the list of approved door colors. It passed unanimously at the next meeting. My navy blue door was now officially compliant. Life in Mapleton Heights slowly returned to normal. Neighbors who had avoided me during Richard's slander campaign now went out of their way to be friendly. Tom apologized for not standing up for me earlier, and we rebuilt our friendship. I even started attending HOA meetings again, not because I enjoyed them, but because I realized how important it was to stay engaged. People like Richard thrive when good people stay silent. The community needed residents who were willing to speak up and hold leaders accountable. One evening in December, nearly 9 months after the nightmare began, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, looking at my navy blue door. It still looked great. The whole ordeal had been exhausting and infuriating, but I had come out the other side stronger. Richard Caldwell had tried to destroy me, but in the end, his threats and slander had cost him dearly. He had lost his position, his reputation, and $185,000. More importantly, he had learned that bullying and defamation have consequences. I never saw Richard around the neighborhood after the trial. I heard he and his wife were planning to move to Florida, presumably to escape the humiliation and rebuild their lives. I did not feel sorry for him. He had brought it all on himself. As the sun set over Mapleton Heights, casting a warm glow over the rows of colonial homes, I felt a sense of peace. This was my home, and I had fought for my right to live here without harassment. The navy blue door was not just a door anymore. It was a symbol of standing up to injustice, no matter how petty or powerful the bully. And every time I walked through that door, I was reminded that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance can lead to the biggest victories. The months following the trial brought unexpected changes to my life and the community. The lawsuit had become something of a local news story, with a Charlotte area newspaper running an article titled HOA President Ordered to Pay $185K in Defamation Case. The story struck a chord with readers, many of whom shared their own HOA horror stories in the comments section. I received emails from people across the state thanking me for standing up to HOA overreach. Greg Patterson, my attorney, told me the case was being discussed in legal circles as a cautionary tale about the limits of HOA authority. "You have set a precedent," he said over lunch one afternoon in January. "Other attorneys are citing this case when dealing with similar situations." I had never intended to become a poster child for HOA reform, but I could not deny that it felt good to know my ordeal might help others avoid similar situations. Back in Mapleton Heights, Brian Foster was proving to be everything Richard Caldwell was not. He was collaborative, transparent, and focused on building community rather than enforcing petty rules. At his first meeting as president, he established a grievance procedure that allowed residents to appeal citations before fines were imposed. He also created a community survey to gauge resident satisfaction and identify areas for improvement. The survey results were eye-opening. Nearly 40% of residents reported feeling intimidated by the previous HOA leadership. Multiple people shared stories of being cited for minor violations, while more serious issues went unaddressed. One resident mentioned that she had been fined for having a slightly faded mailbox, while several homes had serious drainage issues that the HOA ignored. Brian took the feedback seriously and formed committees to address the concerns. I volunteered for the Covenant Review Committee, which was tasked with updating the community rules to be more reasonable and less ambiguous. We spent several months going through the documents line by line, clarifying language and eliminating overly restrictive provisions. One of our biggest changes was replacing the exhaustive list of approved door colors with a simple guideline. Door colors should be neutral or traditional tones that complement the home's exterior. We included examples, but made it clear the list was not exhaustive. We also revised the enforcement procedures to require photographic evidence of violations and to mandate a warning period before any fines could be imposed. The revised covenants were presented to the community in March, almost exactly a year after my confrontation with Richard. The vote was overwhelmingly in favor of the changes. After the meeting, several residents came up to thank me for my role in improving the community. "You really shook things up," said an older gentleman named Frank who lived on the next street over. "This place needed it." Not everyone was happy with the changes, of course. Susan Creamer, though no longer on the board, made her displeasure known at the meeting. "We are opening the door to chaos," she warned. "Without strict rules, property values will decline," but her dire predictions fell flat. Most residents recognized that reasonable rules and fair enforcement would do more to maintain property values than rigid authoritarianism. Around this same time, I learned through the neighborhood grapevine that Richard and his wife had indeed put their house on the market. The listing described it as a meticulously maintained home in a desirable community, which I found darkly ironic given Richard's obsession with finding flaws in everyone else's property. The house sold quickly, and by April, Richard was gone. I felt a strange mix of relief and melancholy watching the moving truck pull away. Relief because his presence had been a source of stress, but melancholy because it was a reminder of how badly things had gone wrong. If Richard had just been reasonable from the start, none of this would have happened. My own life was improving in other ways too. The stress of the lawsuit had taken a toll on my work performance, but once it was resolved, I was able to refocus. My boss noticed the change and assigned me to lead a major project for a new commercial development in downtown Charlotte. It was a career-making opportunity, and I threw myself into it. I also started dating again. After my divorce, I had been hesitant to put myself out there, but a friend set me up with a woman named Rachel who worked as a physical therapist. She was warm, funny, and refreshingly drama-free. When I told her about the HOA saga, she laughed and said, "I rent for a reason." HOAs sound like a nightmare. "Most of them probably are not as bad as mine was," I said. "I just got unlucky." "Or maybe you were the right person at the right time to stand up to a bully," she suggested. I liked that perspective. It reframed the whole experience not as something that happened to me, but as something I had actively overcome. By summer, life in Mapleton Heights had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The neighborhood felt different, more relaxed. People seemed friendlier, more willing to chat over the fence or wave from their driveways. It was as if Richard's departure had lifted a cloud that had been hanging over the community. Brian Foster organized a neighborhood barbecue in June, the first community event in years that was not a mandatory meeting or a fundraiser. Families came out with their kids, and someone set up a volleyball net in the park. I brought Rachel, and we spent the afternoon eating burgers and getting to know the neighbors. Tom and his wife, Jennifer, came over to chat. "This is what the neighborhood should have been all along," Jennifer said, "friendly and welcoming." "Agreed," I said. It is amazing what a difference leadership makes. As the evening wore on and the sun dipped low on the horizon, I found myself standing near the edge of the park, watching kids play and adults laugh. It struck me how fragile community could be, how easily it could be poisoned by one person's need for control. But it was also resilient. Given the chance, people naturally gravitated toward kindness and cooperation. Brian came over with a beer in hand. "I wanted to thank you again," he said. "What you did took guts. A lot of people would have just repainted the door and moved on." "I thought about it," I admitted, "but it was not really about the door. It was about not letting someone abuse their power without consequences." "Well, you made a difference. Not just for you, but for everyone here." We clinked our bottles together, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The fight had been worth it. As autumn arrived, I received a call from a journalist working on a story about HOA reform efforts across North Carolina. She had read about my case and wanted to interview me. I agreed, and the resulting article appeared in a statewide magazine in October. It detailed my experience and included commentary from legal experts about the need for greater oversight of HOA boards. The article generated more attention than I expected. I received invitations to speak at community meetings and even a request to testify before a state legislative committee considering HOA reform legislation. I declined the speaking engagements, not wanting to become a full-time activist, but I did submit written testimony to the legislative committee. My testimony focused on 3 key points: the need for standardized grievance procedures, limits on fine amounts to prevent financial abuse, and protections against retaliation for homeowners who challenge HOA decisions. I do not know if my testimony made a difference, but I later learned that the committee recommended several reforms, including a cap on daily fines and a requirement that HOAs provide written notice and an opportunity to be heard before imposing penalties. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. What had started as a simple home improvement project had spiraled into a nightmare, then transformed into a hard-won victory. I had learned a lot about myself in the process. I had discovered reserves of resilience and determination I did not know I possessed. I had also learned the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult and uncomfortable. The financial award from the lawsuit was sitting in a savings account, mostly untouched. I thought about what to do with it. Part of me wanted to use it for something practical, like paying down my mortgage or investing for retirement. But another part of me wanted to do something meaningful, something that honored the struggle I had been through. I decided to donate $25,000 to a legal aid organization that helped low-income homeowners fight unfair HOA practices. Many people did not have the resources to hire an attorney like I had, and they ended up losing their homes over minor violations and mounting fines. If my experience could help others in similar situations, that felt like the right thing to do. Rachel was supportive of the decision. "That is really generous," she said when I told her. "You are turning something negative into something positive." "Or at least trying to," I said. The donation made the local news, which I had not anticipated. The legal aid organization issued a press release thanking me, and suddenly, I was getting emails and messages from people sharing their own HOA stories and thanking me for helping others. It was overwhelming but also gratifying. Christmas came and went, and as the new year began, I felt like I was finally able to close the chapter on the whole ordeal. Richard Caldwell was gone, the lawsuit was over, and life had returned to normal. Better than normal, actually. The neighborhood was thriving under Brian's leadership, my career was going well, and my relationship with Rachel was getting serious. One cold February evening, I was sitting on my porch wrapped in a blanket, looking at the navy blue door that had started it all. Rachel came out with 2 mugs of hot chocolate and sat down beside me. "Do you ever regret not just repainting the door?" she asked. I thought about it. "No, I mean it would have been easier, but I would have regretted giving in to a bully." And if I had, Richard would still be out there making life miserable for other people. "You are kind of a hero, you know," she said with a smile. I laughed. "I do not know about that, I just did what I had to do." "That is what makes it heroic." We sat in comfortable silence, sipping our hot chocolate and watching the occasional car drive by. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful, exactly what I had been looking for when I moved here 3 years ago. As I looked at that navy blue door, I realized it represented more than just a color choice. It was a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that holding people accountable for their actions matters, and that sometimes the smallest things can become the catalyst for meaningful change. Richard Caldwell had threatened to ruin my reputation, and for a while it seemed like he might succeed. But in the end, his slander and abuse of power cost him far more than it cost me. He lost his position, his reputation, his money, and ultimately his place in the community. I, on the other hand, had gained something far more valuable. I had gained the respect of my neighbors, the satisfaction of standing up to injustice, and the knowledge that I had made a difference. The lawsuit had been exhausting and expensive, but it had been worth every penny and every sleepless night. As spring arrived once again, bringing with it blooming flowers and warmer weather, I felt a sense of renewal. The dark cloud that had hung over Mapleton Heights for so long was gone, replaced by a spirit of cooperation and community. Brian Foster continued to lead with integrity and transparency, and the neighborhood was better for it. I attended HOA meetings regularly now, not because I had to, but because I wanted to stay engaged. I had learned that change happens when good people show up and participate. If everyone just complains from the sidelines, nothing improves. At one meeting in April, a new resident raised a concern about playground equipment that needed repairs. Instead of dismissing it or burying it in bureaucracy, Brian immediately formed a small committee to assess the situation and get quotes for repairs. The playground was fixed within 2 weeks. "This is how it should work," I said to Tom after the meeting. "Leaders who listen and take action." "It is a night and day difference," Tom agreed. "I actually enjoy living here now." That sentiment was shared by many residents. The neighborhood Facebook group, which had once been a tool for Richard's Slander campaign, had transformed into a genuinely positive space where people shared recommendations, organized playdates, and helped each other out. When one family's car broke down, 3 neighbors offered rides. When another family had a medical emergency, the community organized meal deliveries. It was the kind of neighborhood I had imagined when I first moved in, and it had taken a fight to get there. In May, Rachel and I attended another community barbecue, this one even better attended than the previous year. Kids ran around playing tag while adults stood in groups chatting and laughing. Brian was at the grill, flipping burgers and joking with residents. It was a far cry from the tense, anxiety-ridden atmosphere that had existed under Richard's rule. As I stood there watching the scene, Margaret, the older woman who had testified about Richard's slander, approached me. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for standing up to Richard. I know it was not easy. You helped too," I reminded her. "Your testimony made a difference. I am just glad it is over. This neighborhood feels like home again." That word, home, resonated with me. A home is not just a building. It is a place where you feel safe, welcomed, and respected. Richard had tried to take that away from me, but he had failed. As summer turned to fall and then winter once again, I found myself looking back on the entire experience with a sense of perspective. Yes, it had been difficult and stressful. Yes, Richard had caused real harm with his lies and abuse of power. But the outcome had been justice served, and that was not something to take for granted. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to. Richard had been held accountable for his defamation. The HOA had been reformed. And the community was better off for it. I never heard from Richard again after he moved away. I do not know if he reflected on his behavior or if he blamed me for his downfall. Honestly, I did not care. He was someone else's problem now, or hopefully, he had learned his lesson and was no longer anyone's problem at all. What mattered was that I had protected my reputation, my home, and my peace of mind. I had shown that ordinary people can stand up to bullies and win. It was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. One evening in late December, almost 2 years after the whole ordeal began, I was putting up Christmas lights on my porch. Rachel was inside making dinner, and the smell of garlic and herbs wafted through the open door. It was a simple, domestic scene, but it filled me with contentment. As I stepped back to admire the lights, I noticed the navy blue door, still looking as sharp as the day I painted it. I smiled. That door had become a symbol, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. It represented the idea that individuals matter, that standing up for what is right is worth the effort, and that even the most powerful bullies can be brought down when people refuse to be intimidated. I walked inside where Rachel was setting the table. "Lights look great," she said. "Thanks." "I am glad I did not go with the white door," I joked. She laughed. "I think the navy blue suits you. It is bold." Bold, I liked that. For most of my life, I had tried to avoid conflict, to keep my head down and go with the flow. But this experience had taught me that sometimes being bold is necessary. Sometimes you have to fight, not because you want to, but because it is the right thing to do. We sat down to dinner and I raised my glass. To standing up for what is right. Rachel clinked her glass against mine. And to navy blue doors. We both laughed, and in that moment everything felt right. The fight was over. Justice had been served, and life was good. Richard Caldwell had threatened exposure, had said he would ruin my reputation, but his slander had cost him plenty. Meanwhile, I was still here in my home with my navy blue door, living my life on my own terms. And that was the greatest victory of all.